Get your disability pride on by listening to this week's podcast episode. We hope you enjoy. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our podcast. My name is Adrian Forsyth, and I am accompanied with Katryna. Katryna, can you tell me about yourself? Like your background, the classes that you teach?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk about the disability studies minor and the coursework that we have. I'm Katryna Andrusik. I am a professor in the College of Education, specifically in Chesney, specifically in the Department of Special Education. I came to College Park from being a teacher for many years in Baltimore City, as well as an administrator in Washington, D.C., in a charter school there. I was an instructional coach and worked with students across all different learning and skills and abilities. And I'm actually a TERP and EdTERP by way of my PhD. My PhD is from the Department of Special Education. Got that degree quite a few years ago. Yeah, and then within the department, I teach two kinds of courses. I teach courses in our teacher education track, and then I also teach two of the core disability studies courses.
That's a lot.
It is, but in like a good way because I love working with the students and I love watching them learn and grow in the field of both becoming great teachers and also as they explore the disability studies minor. It's pretty awesome to watch them learn and begin to think about the civil rights and the aspect of disability that we discuss.
So, how did you get started working in the disability realm?
Yeah, I started as a teacher of all students in Baltimore, in a middle school in the west side of Baltimore. And my students who were in my courses, sometimes they were quote unquote pulled out for what they needed academically. And then sometimes I had them in class. I also taught small group reading classes my first year without a lot of prep. And so I really had to quickly dive into understanding what students needed to become competent readers. And so from there, I decided to actually spend a year in a private school outside of Baltimore that has students who have all learning and attentional needs. And it really inspired a passion in me to really work with kids who identified as students who have a lot of exceptional needs. And I was a special educator in Baltimore City for 3 years. And then the opportunity to do the PhD here came up, and I decided to jump into that. So um, that sort of is how my academic and professional career sort of started from that aspect.
That's really cool.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think that working in a school that only had students with disabilities was so different from teaching all the kids in the classroom, which is eventually what I did when I finished my PhD. And I was in the charter school, and in the charter school was a fully inclusion setting for all students. So I had this experience of being in a school that was doing pullout. And then I was in a school that was a totally separate setting for children who needed a lot of academic and sometimes social support. And then to be in a high school for 8 years where our students who were receiving diplomas were in with students who were getting certificates of attendance, where kids were going everywhere from Harvard to Howard to community college to job to the military to transition services. Having the opportunity to work with students across all those experiences in those different kinds of schools really inspired in me the importance of our teachers and our students at College Park knowing and understanding about disability.
Oh, cool. Okay, so I need to ask you if you have any family or friends who have disabilities.
I mean, I think we all do, right? Not to get too specific on statistics or information that you might learn in my courses, but the CDC did just release that the most recent data that we have says that 70 million Americans identify someone with a disability, which is about 1 in 4. Yeah, a little under 1 in 4 Americans. So when you think of it like that, we actually all do. But specifically for me, I have a cousin who has schizophrenia, and I remember that being um, a really intense time. I was a young adolescent, and I remember learning for the first time what it was like for someone to have a really intense emotional and mental illness need that really was really sort of marginalized by society. And I remember just the feelings of how my family felt as they supported my aunt in helping her through that. Um, in terms of, not necessarily her, but right, that social model of disability, that she had a mental a mental wellness need and it wasn't being met. So that's really my first memory as with a family member. And then a lot of my friends, of course, have disabilities. I think, like I said, we all have friends who identify as disabled people. But for me, again, with being in education, a lot of people, their children, are kids who identify as autistic, learning differences, ADHD, and it's been really interesting to see like how different people navigate those systems. Um, it's a really interesting piece of that.
How
And
about in college? Like, so I'm wondering how the college, if it's, how will they learn in college?
in terms of my students, or in terms of the
The, dis- the people with disabilities.
oh yeah, so that's a great question. So I would say, well, I can use some of my friends, my students here. So I think there's two ways to look at that. So I have friends who have student children who are attending a whole different range of colleges, and I think every student's journey is really different. And I think that'd be the first thing I would say as I begin to talk about kids here at College Park. I would say the first would be that parents really have to support their students in thinking about what setting is going to be the best for them. Um, and then when I think about that, what it looks like here, I think that a really interesting piece is that we're lucky enough to have a program like Chirp Succeeds. And I think we're also Chirp Succeed. And I think we're also lucky enough to have a lot of dedicated ADS and other folks who want to support students on campus. But I think that the journey seems really as unique as every student, right? Like I think some of our students really embrace and are part of our disabled community here on campus. And then I think other students are still trying to figure out how to be a successful college student with a disability. And I think that can be really hard, you know?
I
I
think
think
it's
it can be
hard
really
for
hard.
everybody
Yeah,
sometimes.
I know college is hard for college seems to be hard for everyone at times. So I agree.
So, how crucial are disability studies courses for diversity, equity, and inclusion?
So first of all, I love that you said diversity, equity, and inclusion out. I am bound and determined to not give them initials. So I love that. I also think too that something that I find really interesting is that people don't talk about the access on that. It's almost like we don't necessarily talk about accessibility separately. And so for me is a huge part. When I think about inclusion, I think about accessibility. And to your point, I think that, I mean, not to say that my coursework is incredibly crucial to the university, but I think if you're going to say that your university's purpose is to do good, I think that our coursework fits into that with diversity, equity, inclusion perfectly. Like, I think every single thing that we teach, I think that every learning outcome, I think every assignment pushes students to be accountable to thinking outside of their own box. And that includes students who have disabilities, right? I mean, we have students in class who identify as disabled students, but who have maybe not had the opportunity or reason to think about how what they need might differ a lot from what another student with a different disability might need, or a student with the same disability and how it manifests differently. So um, I think that the courses actually really center that for students, and it centers for them the importance of learning about how, to your point, college is hard and it looks hard for different people for different reasons. And things that I think too that might have made high school hard for some students or social for some students are actually easier at the university, because their disabilities allow them to have a different lens into how they engage with school. But those are the kind of things that we talk about in those courses, are those aspects of disability, equity, inclusion, and access. Um, I mean, I think that something that I recently learned is that doctors, Carolyn Fink and Peter Leone, when they started the disability studies minor in those courses, they actually did it because students were interested in learning more about the history of disability rights in this country. And I think that just speaks to what amazing students we have on campus, that they wanted to have this kind of coursework because they didn't think that their coursework was inclusive enough of the diversity of disability and the history of it. And they wanted to know more about inclusion and equity for students with disabilities on college campuses, in the workplace, and in K 12 education. So I think it's pretty amazing that our students are the ones who pushed to have coursework be more attentive to diversity, equity, inclusion. And I think, if anything, that's probably why it's so essential to that, because it's really rooted in what students wanted.
Can you go into specific about what you teach in classes?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like this is a great marketing opportunity, actually, because the classes are amazing. In part because the students are so willing and able to engage with it. I think right now, with everything that's happening at the federal level, I think it's a really interesting time for them to be taking these courses. But really briefly, CHESI 205 is our Introduction to Disability Studies course that's required for all students. It's the one where you come and do guest lecturing for Dr. Lee and I, which is wonderful because one of the biggest things in that course is to have guest lecturers come and speak on a range of topics. We've had students come and faculty come talk on family panels. We've had guests come to talk about employment, sports and recreation. We had Terp Succeed 2 weeks ago. We had Amy and Meredith and two peer mentors, and one of the young women who is participating in the program come. It was an amazing panel. It was focused on peer mentoring, and the students were so excited to learn about it. I think that we just Terp Succeed Peer Mentoring is going to need like 5 more classes. It's going to be amazing. Yeah. So it's going to, I mean, people were just so excited. The students were just so excited about it. But yeah, 205, CHESI 205 is really focused on that. It's the idea of really having guest speakers who are disabled, work in the disabled community, are allies and advocates. The class starts with talking about history, but then we move right into letting students really hear from first person people who are doing the work of disability justice. And then they do projects that are current events around topics in disability justice. 4 of our students are actually going to a coffee shop in Frederick that is run by a young man with Down syndrome and are going there, yeah, to spend a couple hours. They want to interview him and talk about it and talk about why we do not have more businesses owned by people in the disabled community. So it's creating that kind of level of advocacy among our students who are already phenomenal and already are pushing back on the ableism that they see, and it's just giving them a path to do that. So that class really allows students to be able to engage that way with the community. And then EDSP 220 is the other one that I teach, and that course, the founding faculty for that is Dr. Carolyn Fink, and that is really situated in our service learning. And that course allows students to engage as allies and advocates in disability justice. And it's really cool because they do service learning with Chirp Succeed, Maryland Mentor Corps, the JTCC, which is the junior, I don't want to mess up the title, Junior Tennis Champion Center down the road. Um, and they get a chance to be able to do true service learning, so not volunteering, right? It's the idea that like they learn from the organization learns from them, and they have to do a lot of reflecting and work around it. And I think that I I believe, I don't think, I believe that the people who created these 2 courses in particular were really thinking about how do we activate our students to be good advocates and allies for themselves too, right? Again, I would say that in our disability studies core classes, we probably have more students who identify as disabled than maybe in some other classes in general across campus. I don't, yeah, I don't, yeah, and I don't know if the number is higher or not, but it's always exciting to see them feel really confident in their identity, and then to sort of through the guest speakers in CHESI 205 or through the service learning in EDSP 220, um, really sort of investigate their own identities and thinking about their own level of advocacy for themselves and others. And then for students without disabilities, it really gives them a chance to think about what it means for us to truly live those principles you just talked about, right? About being really inclusive and equity. So those are the 2 focuses I would say of those classes: the service learning and the guest speakers and lived experience.
So, have you ever seen students benefiting from taking your class?
I like to think so. No, I would say this year we had a record number of students apply to do the disability studies minor. And I think it's because these classes are so engaging and so community based. And I think students want more classes like that. They want to have experiential learning. They want to have an opportunity to engage with the local community. They want to have an opportunity to engage more on campus. Terp Succeed, like I said, more and more students are interested in becoming peer mentors as that program grows, and I think that that is a benefit of taking the class. Um, I think that in general, more students are thinking about taking courses in the School of Education. For example, we have an Intro to Special Ed course, the peer mentoring I mentioned, but we also have a growing ASL program to put a pitch in there. We have more and more opportunities for students to learn American Sign Language, and I think that that again is coming out of the disability studies coursework. And I think also the benefits from taking the class include that students are connecting with other students um, around campus, right? So the team that you have, someone like Emily, who you have supporting, supporting us in doing this work, being able to come in and they see another student being an advocate, and I think it makes them really excited to see that we can all be advocates and allies. And I also think it helps them understand that we all have our own stories. That a lot of us live with people, family members who are blind, deaf, have multiple sclerosis, have cerebral palsy, have a wide range of different physical and sensory disabilities, and that it's really our responsibility to walk with kindness and think about like what everyone is doing in trying to sort of be an advocate or an ally in their work. So yeah, I mean, hopefully, I would say for me, what I hope the benefit is that they're all becoming better humans, right? We're all becoming better humans together and building a community that does that. That would be my hopeful benefit.
It's great to have a community.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think it's growing, right? Like I think like even compared to a couple years ago, I think there's just an increased community around, right? Like around the disabled community, around people who identify as such. I mean, I think like the increase in the attention to the disability center and its location and just the conversations around where that's been and where that's going. I think all of those things speak to people becoming more engaged and becoming more advocates for their peers and their families. So, yeah.
Exactly. I have a peer, and she has two brothers who are blind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly that kind of I feel like maybe 10 years ago, a student might not have said that, right? They might not have shared about their own identity so much. And I think that now students do that because they feel confident that they're going to be seen and valued um, and recognized not as some kind of ableistic trope, but as like, we are all fighting for everybody to have what they deserve. And that sometimes means like being the allies for our family members.
So I'm wondering about that
Mm-hmm.
because I know that there's like some sort of a um language first versus
Mm.
identity
Yeah, identity first.
identity
Yeah,
first.
absolutely.
Can you explain
Yeah.
that?
Oh my gosh, that's such a I feel like it's both a loaded question for some people and then for others not at all. I always tell my students to ask, but to define those for people who might not know. So when we say person first identity, that is something that I think we can say historically came out of when we used really derogatory terms for people with disabilities, terms that we don't even reference or use today. And also ableist language, right? So I think a one that I could use would be we might have said 45 or 50 years ago on one of those awful telethons, right? Like this little girl is confined to a wheelchair, right? That really sort of like ableist language that really just sort of define the person by the disability. And I think the person first language, when we talk about like a person with a disability, was really recognizing that a person is a human being first and above. And I think recently, the change within the disability community to instead use identity first language, so saying a disabled person, an autistic individual, I think there is a real beauty and power in that, and I really love when a community takes back their own language. And it's really an awesome thing. So, that identity first. What I always tell people who do not define themselves as having a disability, of whom I would be one, I think the best thing to do is always ask someone how they want to be defined. So a few weeks ago, I was at an event, and the comedian was an autistic woman who did not know that she had autism. She didn't learn about her autism formally until she was in her mid 20s. And we were talking, and I said how much I really wanted to invite her to campus to be a guest speaker in my class. And I just said to her, I said, do you mind if I just ask, do you prefer uh, to be defined as a person with autism or autistic? And she said, autistic. Like now that I know like where my brain is functioning and falls, I define myself as autistic. That's who I am. And I thought, I need to remember to use this as an example with my students of how asking is actually the best way to recognize someone as a person who then says that their identity is a huge part of them.
Because asking is more respectful.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, right? Like I would imagine, I mean, I know for myself and our identities, right? Like any identity we have, we love when people ask us for what we decide that we are, right? As opposed to sort of that like notion that society gets to define us.
I mean, I do have a friend who has two brothers, so
Yeah.
I don't know if they want to identify as blind or the names, so I don't know if the sister is okay with it.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine, I mean, to your point around the asking, right? And I even wonder too sometimes, something that we talk about is if different people in the family have different ways that they identify, right? Again, that social idea that we decide on someone else's label as opposed to how someone else would define themselves. I think those are the intricacies around disability that the disability studies minor tries to tease out and help students be able to have like courageous conversations about with themselves and then to have humility in their interactions with other people. Again, something I hope students are learning as they sit in our classes.
So in your classes, are there challenging common misconceptions and stereotypes?
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. I think that's a great question. I think that some students come to the class already aware that there are misconceptions and stereotypes and they want to learn about them so they can break them down and find voice when they know that something isn't right. I think that other students don't know that they are coming with a lot of stereotypes and misconceptions. And I think sometimes the first couple of weeks are a little bit bumpy for them because it's hard to be told that through no fault of their own, their ableist society has made them, a little bit judgmental or make assumptions about people with disabilities. But I think that the way that we best break down some of those misconceptions and stereotypes is again having a lot of guest speakers. I think that like when you come in and you're like, I'm running my own organization, and they sort of are thinking about their previous experiences with someone who has Down syndrome or their previous assumptions about what they've been told if they're not one of my students who has a sibling with Downs or a family member. I think a couple of them are, even on the last week of class when you come in, still in this place of like, oh, wow, I did have, like, even though I've been in this class, I've still continued to have stereotypes or assumptions, right? And so I think the guest speakers are a huge part of that. I also think that we spend a lot of time having them read a lot of first person narratives. And I think that gives them an opportunity to hear about people who are doing the work of advocacy and allyship, but also people who are living with disabilities and not apologizing for whatever that looks like. Whether it looks like having to have someone in their home living with them 24 hours a day or someone who's leading a completely independent life. I think that those first stories really show them that like each disability is unique as the person. And I think that's an important way to break down stereotypes and assumptions.
Mm. So, what change would you like to see in how disability studies should be integrated into education?
I mean, that's a whole dissertation, but I think I know, right? Like there's so many things I would love to change. I think that for me, what I would love is for students to have more knowledge about it before they get to college. I think that we don't talk about the disability rights movement and the civil rights movement enough in elementary, middle, and high school. So I'd love for students to have earlier exposure to it before they even get to college and to their education on campus or into education coursework. I just don't think that students should hear about Judy Heumann or Ed Roberts for the first time from me. But I also think that at the college level, I mean, we've talked about this. It would be awesome if students had more knowledge of this in all of their classes in the College of Education, right? Like, I think that that would be amazing if more students had to take this kind of coursework, but also students who aren't even in the College of Education. So, for example, music students are, in the College of Music. And so um, it's a different set of coursework. And I think they could benefit from it as well. So I think it would be awesome if we could figure out how to talk about disability, not just because it's in quote unquote special education, but talk about disability as a culture and a way for us to engage with students and show that we value them. I would love it. We're gonna work on it.
People with disabilities are valuable.
Yeah, of course. It's almost shocking to me how much sometimes I still say those things, and there isn't an immediate acceptance of it. People sort of have to be sold on it. So yeah, we have work to do. We have work to do. We're working hard, and we have work to do.
Actually, that's actually actually there's a question following up with that.
Yeah.
Um, can you share any impactful moments from your teaching experience over the years?
So I wrote down actually a few things when I was thinking about this conversation today. And I think there are a lot of times that students I don't think they realize how impactful they are on their professors and on the world around them when they share themselves. So I think that some of the most impactful things for me have been as a professor have been when students have in class, just talking just now about identity first, when students have said things like, well, I have ADHD or I'm autistic. And when I'm in class, and it makes me feel really, really proud of them and really humbled that they feel safe in our classroom being their full selves. Because I think when we're our full selves, it's when we're our boldest and most confident and most sincere, and also our most empathetic and compassionate and kind. And so I love when students really are able to identify themselves as disabled really comfortably with their peers. So that kind of, I think, is probably something that feels really good. I'd say also when students tell me that they've decided they want to be a teacher or a school psychologist or a guidance counselor because they've taken one of our classes, that's very powerful for me as someone who's been a teacher for so many years. I think teaching is such a powerful act of social justice that for them to say that really feels amazing. Today in FESI 205, I had a student who was a TA who took the class last year with Dr. Lee and then was my TA last semester. She actually gave the lecture today. And so to see them grow to the point where they can give a lecture is amazing in disability studies. And then I would say the last thing is the most impactful is that, when students feel safe telling you about their diagnoses or they write personal essays and, can tell you about who they are. It just is so humbling when they're just telling you about themselves, whether or not they're someone who identifies as someone with a disability, just their willingness to tell their stories and be their authentic best selves is pretty amazing. I mean, if we had more courses where kids felt like they could talk about disability and the impact it has on their families, their homes, themselves, I think that would be a pretty amazing thing. So those have been some of the impactful moments I've been lucky enough to have.
You must be a very lucky person.
Oh, I have the best job. I mean, I literally spend all day with the students who are going to change the world. They're going to fix everything that's broken right now and they're going to make it better, and they're going to do it in ways that are not even thought of yet, especially when it comes to disability rights and advocacy. They're going to make it better. I have to have faith that they're going to make it better.
Oh, I bet they will.
I am too.
They have a great teacher.
Oh, thanks. Well, they're the one doing the teaching. I'm just sitting there reading the papers they write. But thank you.
Oh.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
Oh, it is. And thank you for those who are listening. Please stay in tune for the next podcast.